Welcome to the Holding Time podcast, where we share inspiring stories from remarkable mothers who participated in the Holding Time project in Bradford. Each episode, we explore their unique breastfeeding stories, the highs, the lows, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you're expecting, a new parent, or simply curious, we invite you to hear from these resilient warrior women as they share their experiences. Find out more at holdingtime.org.
Hi, I'm Frances and I have a daughter who is just over 2.5, I think 2 years, 8 months now.
Are you breastfeeding your daughter? Is it an ongoing relationship or is it something that has now come to an end?
Yes, so I'm currently breastfeeding her. So yeah, she's 2 years, 8 months and we are still breastfeeding. No signs of stopping anytime soon, although I do think about it sometimes.
Were you breastfed? Do you come from a breastfeeding family or culture, or was that something that you set out on your own to do?
Yeah, I was breastfed myself. And so I think without ever thinking about it loads, it was just something that did seem normal and I assumed that I do. My mum breastfed me and my sister. So I'm not sure exactly how long, actually, but definitely not as long as I've been breastfeeding my daughter now.
You do definitely see a very strong correlation between women who were breastfed and breastfeeding. That's why I always ask that question, because there's such a big difference in the experience, I think, between women who themselves were breastfed and women who themselves weren't breastfed.
Until having a child and breastfeeding myself, like I said, I didn't think too much about my views on breastfeeding, what was normal or what society thought about it either. It just seemed to make sense. But it's only afterwards that you kind of realize the difficulties people experience, or also just how much your own personal ideas about it feed into what you try to do or how you feel about it. I had assumed that I would breastfeed, and I guess I had an assumption that that was something that could be done as well. I did have some difficulties like pain or getting the right kind of latch at the start. And I kept going through that, which I'm not sure exactly where that came from, like why I wanted to do that. But I guess it just felt like I must have had an underlying belief that it was something I could do, which I think has got to be influenced to a certain extent by the fact that I was breastfed. And that always seemed like a normal and achievable thing.
Your mother, was she a support for you in those early days?
Yes, we had a lot of issues with our daughter what babies sleep very much, but she didn't sleep. She needed holding an awful lot. And so there was just that a lot of support of being around. I was struggling a bit with getting the latch right and thinking about all those kinds of things. I did a lot of accessing kind of local support groups and things like that. My memory isn't amazing about all the details, but I don't remember talking a lot about the real specifics with my mum of like strategies for breastfeeding and things like that. Yeah. I think it was more of a general support, really. I think if I was thinking that I wanted to try a bit of formula or do that kind of thing, I think she might not have understood that, because that's just not something that we've thought about.
Yeah, that can be another kind of pressure. And I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on new mothers, full stop, and it's in both directions, isn't it? I've certainly interviewed mothers who come from like a really strong cultural inheritance of breastfeeding, and when they've not been able to breastfeed, that has led to a whole set of problems in itself.
Yeah, that must be really difficult. I think a lot of the pressure from me came from myself, but I didn't really feel like I had I must breastfeed for this long. Like I had friends who had breastfed for a bit and then they were combi feeding. A lot of people talking about like how hard it can be. And so, I very much had examples and a support network of people who hadn't fully breastfed or who had transitioned away. But it was more pressure from me. I think I'm very I like to read about things and learn about things. I did well at school and things like that. And I read things on social media where there's a lot of useful information and lots of tips. I definitely learned a lot from some of the lactation consultants that I followed on Instagram. I think it was a bit later on, but I did attend a couple of the Zoom like workshop type things that people ran. I went to support groups. So I was quite informed about the fact that that kind of support existed, and I did take advantage of it. Without this being something that I was consciously thinking at the time, I think I wanted to get it right. I wanted to kind of succeed at it.
So did that help? Did the social media and the Zooms and so on, did those help?
Yeah, I think that a couple of the things that I'd learned from that was very much like, it is something that you're both kind of learning that skill. The idea of not having any kind of schedule, it was very much like responsive breastfeeding that I'd sort of seen and was doing. So the kind of people who'd be saying, look, it doesn't matter if they're feeding because they're hungry or if it's for comfort, it's all great and valid. And so I didn't have any issues about, oh, how long had it been since she'd fed? Should I feed now? Should I feed her to sleep? I definitely absorbed a lot of those messages about, it's fine to feed to sleep. It's fine to feed for comfort. They need to feed a lot.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of going with that. Because I think maybe if I think more about like my mum's experience, it was like kind of feed on a schedule every 4 hours or something like that. Whereas I was very much responsibly breastfeeding, and that seemed to be working as well. I mean, it wasn't working so great for my nipples, but I never had worries about supply or if she was getting enough. She was back to birth weight pretty quick.
Did you have quite a straightforward birth? Was it, gave birth and then did skin to skin and the breastfeeding followed, or?
It didn't follow as I'd read. I think, again, you read about it and it's like, okay, we need to do this. I have to be overlaxed. And then after the birth, she might just crawl up and she'll know what to do. It didn't really feel like that. Labour took quite a while. I like the early stages and everything just went on for ages. And then I did have an epidural, and what else was, there's not, yeah, everything was generally fine. But apparently, I think, I don't remember too much about afterwards. I think they did put her on me. She might have been, I don't know if it was fully all skin to skin. They did put her on me, but it wasn't like the crawl up and latch on sort of natural thing. I think I stayed in hospital that night and then the following night as well. And a big thing that I was worrying about then was about the latch, potentially overthinking it a lot, because it's that thing of you've got the book knowledge of, okay, she's meant to do this and I'm meant to do this. But when in reality, you've got this tiny baby with a tiny, tiny mouth and can't see what's going on, what you're trying to do. I was there in the hospital trying to take films with my phone so that I could actually see kind of what was going on, because I couldn't see, and probably overthinking it quite a bit.
Was there someone there that helped or advised you?
I did ask the midwives in the hospital quite a bit, I think, and people had mentioned different ideas, but I never quite felt like anything there was clicking. But in the hospital, the reason I stayed the second night was I spoke to a breastfeeding consultant in the hospital who I thought was really great. And she'd said
Was that Bradford Infirmary?
It was, yeah.
Was that Ria?
Yeah, it was Ria. I was thinking I should say her name because I thought she was great. And it was actually because she said to me that she'd have a bit more time the next morning, or she could come again the next morning. And basically I stayed in that second night because I thought I'd like to see her and talk to her again. And that second night in hospital, because the first night in hospital was when it sank in. I just remember at one moment thinking, God, like, so my daughter didn't want to stay in the little cot thing and sleep. I was really tired. And I just thought, I can't sleep. If I need to look after her, how do I do this? The first night was just all that kind of confusion. And then the second night, I remember, I think I just realized that I'm not going to be sleeping. And I just remember holding her a lot and trying to feed, doing those little videos. But I was getting that. I think it might have been that night when, we did some damage on my nipples or whatever. There was my cousin I'd texted her because my mum said, that she'd used nipple shields. I'm like, do I need to use nipple shields? But nipple shields aren't necessarily a great idea. So all of that kind of stuff going on. But yeah, that support was really great. I don't know how good it was being in hospital the extra little bit of time, but I was keen enough to talk to Ria and get a bit more of that support that I thought I'd do that.
So how were the days and weeks then when you got home?
It was quite hard at first, actually. It took about a month before it stopped hurting. So
months, yeah, that's quite a long time, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be experiencing pain on every feed if you're feeding 8 times a day.
Yeah, and I knew it shouldn't be, because there's that whole thing of it's common. You hear a lot of people saying it, which is kind of reassuring on one level, like other mums saying, oh yeah, it hurt, but then it doesn't hurt, it stopped. But also knowing that technically it's not normal, it shouldn't actually necessarily be hurting at all. But it wasn't just a bit of tenderness. I was looking back at some messages I'd sent to friends or things, and I was referring to like craters in my nipple that it I remember I had the cream things, and I got one of the silver cup things that you could put on so I tried various things to keep it going. But I do remember having that feeling of, breastfeeding is very wrapped up with the sleep as well, because couldn't really sleep. So the whole first few weeks was very much just kind of surviving through all of that and figuring it out. And the pain took a while. So I do remember having that feeling of sort of knowing that a feed was going to come round again, and a bit of that feeling of anticipating it and knowing it might be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
My husband remembers it and says, you were it was hurting you a lot and things. I don't even know if I was thinking of it. I was kind of powering through, and I wanted to do it. It sounds weird, doesn't it, really? But there were other things that helped. Like I did have a pump, like a really good pump that I'd hired, that a friend had mentioned using, but I didn't get around to, I tried it maybe once, and it was partly, I think the idea was maybe it would help give my nipples a break or something like that. And also because once my milk had come in as well, and my boobs were just big and hard and uncomfortable. But I think the pump was the backup, because I had friends who'd done that and they'd done more pumping and combi feeding. So it's like recognizing that might be an option. I think I was always on the edge of not knowing when that might be a decision I'd feel I wanted to make. But it just didn't feel like I had time to work it out. Like there was always a baby in my hands, or I was trying to sleep, or so even though on one hand it sounds quite simple to get a pump out and do that, I just didn't feel like I had time. So obviously it wasn't my top priority, but I guess there's aspects of that aren't as simple either. You've got all the parts, and then they need washing up, and breastfeeding is very convenient in the sense that you don't have to think about what you're taking out with you when you start then going out and about. You don't need to know when she's going to need to feed and any of that.
And how was going out and about? How did you find that?
It took us a bit of time to sort of start going out much. I think it was after a week that we first went out, and we went to a local cafe, we were the only ones there, and I did feed her there, which felt like a bit of a win. It's uncomfortable because at the start, when you don't know what you're doing and feel like you can't see what's happening, it's harder to feel like you're being discreet about it. You sort of need to get everything out and open everything up. So I think I was quite glad that it was quiet there. There's another time I remember feeding her on some steps, like outside the supermarket or something like that, which was a bit awkward because it was a bit cold. My general experience after getting started is I've not worried too much about feeding out and about.
When you say you haven't worried, do you mean that you just feed wherever? Or
Yeah,
do you mean that
generally.
you don't feed out and about?
No, I would feed out and about if I needed to. And I think, again, it's another one of those messages that I've absorbed. Well, you can do it anywhere, can't you? No, it's not something that people shouldn't have an issue with it.
You're quite defiant about being entitled to do that. But I mean, that helps, doesn't it? Because I meet women who've breastfed 4 children and never fed in public.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I can totally understand that and feeling hesitant about it. It's not that I always feel confident about it. It's funny because I can remember times when I might see someone breastfeeding. That's where you realize how little you do see it, because you might kind of feel that you kind of want to look because it's something a bit different. And I guess partly maybe I feel like because I am doing it and feel it is normal, you're kind of aware that there's a bit of a contribution you can make there by doing it and doing it as if it's just normal.
I can tell that you have really benefited from this online community who've empowered you, in your choices that you've made. And I was wondering, do you feed back into that community now that you've sort of cracked it, managed to go 2 3/4 years? Do you post on those same places that you used yourself?
The short answer is no, really. If there's an example, a time where I think, oh, I could make a comment here that I know I would have found helpful when I was starting, then I might try to do that. But I'm not really using Facebook at the moment. I'm not sure how to log back in. And then with Instagram, again, I'm kind of spending a bit less time with social media. I might be more likely to send a message, say directly to the feeding team at the hospital, maybe, and kind of on reflection, let them know how much they helped. Or I am conscious of kind of feeding back in. The other thing I think of is the breastfeeding groups and the peer supporters that helped me. I feel a bit like I wouldn't remember enough about like the details of my experience to be able to answer someone's specific questions. Like, I think when I was really deep in the weeds about it, thinking about all these really specific things, I'm not sure if I'd be able to answer my own questions about, oh yeah, this happens, or that was normal, or this is what I did.
But they're trained, aren't they? They do training, the peer support team. I mean, that's something that I tried to do, but I ended up basically doing this project instead. You can do the training and they give you a lot of that basic technical info. I mean, I don't think they're expecting you to be an overnight lactation consultant, and I'm not even saying that you should feedback in, but I'm just interested to know how much that experience of making it work transforms itself into an experience of supporting other women through the channels that were useful to you or other channels. It's just interesting to find out. I suppose something that I'm always interested in is how much motherhood changes women's lives, and specifically their individual experience of motherhood and in what ways it changes. And sometimes it doesn't, and what we're led to believe, I suppose, and it does obviously happen, is that people do have babies and just carry on as before. But I noticed quite a lot of that not happening. So I'm always interested in, so how did it change you and in what way? And because that's interesting to reflect upon in terms of how we integrate motherhood into the rest of our lives. Does it disrupt the rest of our lives? Does it change it, or have we found a way of making it work?
I think it would be difficult to breastfeed in this way without it changing your life. Like, say, responsive breastfeeding does mean that you're kind of being led a lot by the child, and a child who is probably going to want to breastfeed a lot. I'm conscious at the moment because now she's a toddler. Obviously, I've gone back to work. She goes to nursery or goes to other places. I haven't really decided what boundaries or what limits I want to put in place. So I guess in general, I'm okay with the amount of breastfeeding. It doesn't feel like loads in the day, or, when I'm with her. So I haven't felt a big need to make some big changes. I think having a child is one of those situations where it really makes you realize, like we discussed before, your upbringing and your experiences, and then also your own kind of personality and habits. And so there's a lot that I can see about myself that is kind of a theme that I might have noticed before. So like I said, about overthinking, learning a lot about breastfeeding, wanting to get it right. That's something that I will do. I want to read and learn about things. It can be a positive and it can go to the point where it's a bit negative as well, because a lot of it is you need to kind of learn your child and connect with your child. And also have your own sense of what is success or what you want to do, rather than necessarily being led by a feeling that there's a right thing to do that's come from some kind of external sources. That idea that there's right and wrong and there's ways that things happen, I might have been worrying about some details I didn't need to worry about.
It's one of the problems with kind of medicalizing birth. Breastfeeding also, I mean, there needs to be support there, and there needs to be an infant support network and team, and they do great work. I think what's useful about the social media is that it's more peer-to-peer and it's less manual based. Because really, when I had my daughter 11 years ago, there was a bit of that social media advice, but there was a lot less. And there was an awful lot of technical stuff. Like the main authority was Kelly Mum, which is like for lactation consultants. But loads of mothers were using it. Mothers were using it because I suppose they needed help above and beyond the resources that were available to them via the infant feeding teams. You know, you might get 1 visit or 2 visits at the most, whereas, and it's brilliant, you do get those home visits, but you might need help for 10 visits, you know. So without having friends and family to ask, then you do end up absorbing a lot of factual information and looking at a lot of medical diagrams. And sometimes I found for myself that could be almost off-putting, you know, sort of alienating.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of those diagrams.
The main thing there was. Because, I don't think I came across too much of that was overly kind of medicalized. I remember the stuff about kind of the latch and how that should be. So it's like their nose should be here and then chin up and that kind of thing. And so I knew that was what it was meant to be, which was probably good that I knew that, but then it never seemed to be what was happening, or I couldn't see if that was happening. And I don't know if the fact that I knew that and was worrying about it made it worse or made it better.
I mean, it definitely didn't help me. And I didn't breastfeed for 4 months, partly because I just had a tongue-tied baby, but also because that whole thing, like all the different positions and the latch and everything, it's just not relevant if you've got a posterior tongue tie and your baby can't get your nipple in their mouth, you know? So I think recognizing tongue tie has really improved. I'm just meeting so many women that are getting that diagnosed very quickly, and Ria's really, really hot on that in Bradford. And so it's interesting that in Bradford, I'm not interviewing women who had problems with tongue tie, which is a real credit to her personally. Like you have one person like that in an infant feeding team, and it is a game changer for all women going through their care. That type of thing leads to so many long running problems. I'm always sort of interested to think about this project and where it sits in terms of supporting women breastfeeding, because I never wanted to make a project that would be about the technicalities. But then there's some basics that I felt we need, like knowing what it looks like to hold a baby and feed them is quite a useful thing to see if you've not seen breastfeeding. Because we don't typically see breastfeeding, like you say, in public is so rare. Even just like when I would photograph mothers who'd breastfed 3 children, I'd really notice how they'd perfected the art of lying that baby on their lap, you know, and the way they would hold the child was the absolute maximum amount of ease and minimum amount of effort. And seeing that kind of really natural pose, there's something I think that's still useful about photographing mothers for that reason. And that's also why I like to photograph mothers with really young babies. And also, you know, I'm pleased to hear that you've got an older child, because I haven't interviewed many women with toddlers, and I think it's really important to see mothers breastfeeding toddlers to know what that looks like as well, because it is so different.
One of the groups I went to was the monthly meeting of La Leche League in Ilkley. I liked that one because it was kind of everyone sat in a circle and you'd hear different people's issues and problems and people sharing their experiences. And they had quite a few people who were breastfeeding older kids as well, like toddlers. And I remember going to that and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be breastfeeding when they're that old. I definitely had a bit of that feeling of that being less normal, or I kind of just thought, I didn't see myself doing that. And I definitely noticed that I just hadn't really seen, like, I think probably some of them, the kid might have only been about 1.5, but they still looked big for what I would expect or have known for breastfeeding. I don't know where I would have seen anyone feeding an older child. I just haven't seen it. I can't even think much of the depictions of breastfeeding. Like, the main one, especially when you think of older children, is the bitty one. And it's because at the time, I mean, Little Britain was very, there's lots of stuff that's more problematic about it that we realise now. But again, just noticing how ingrained that idea of it being strange when they're older kind of is. Because even if you wouldn't take it to that extreme, I just hadn't ever thought that I would breastfeed an older child. And when I say older, I don't even mean that much older, do I? Like 2 rather than 1. I am quite conscious now, actually. So say if I breastfeed my daughter, I know that people might be kind of having that experience. They may not have seen it before. Because it's something that's kind of unusual, it could seem like you are doing this kind of radical act, but actually it's not. It's just that you haven't stopped. Like, actually, it's because day by day you haven't changed anything. It's you kind of just taken that easier, natural route of just continuing.
Thank you for listening to the Holding Time podcast. We're grateful to everyone involved in this project, including our partners and funders, Bradford District Care Trust and Arts Council England and Better Place Bradford, and all the incredible mothers and families who made it all possible. For more information, visit holdingtime.org. The link is in the episode description. Please like, follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And consider sharing this podcast to help raise awareness and support for breastfeeding.